This is Father Bonaventure Chapman.
And this is Father Patrick Mary Briscoe.
Welcome to Godsplaining. Thanks to all those who support us. If you enjoy the show, please consider making a monthly donation on Patreon. Be sure to like and subscribe to Godsplaining wherever you listen to your podcasts. Here we are. I love that new opening. It's just fantastic. It's like NPR stuff. Okay, so that's great. This is a standard episode, you could say, but this is also kind of, should we say this is a sort of God guest-splaining episode, because Father Patrick Mary and I live together in Dominican House of Studies. We were in the same class as all the Godsplainers are, and so we lived before, but then our second tour of duty, you could say, we're back here living together. And so, we pray together, and we're out together a good bit, and so I see him, but he's been missing recently from the community for a couple of weeks, and I don't notice this all the time because I'm usually reading early modern German texts and not paying attention to much else. But I do miss Father. If you know Father Patrick, it's hard to miss his presence. So when he's not here, I can tell, and he was, and he's been out and about, sort of things, and usually it's to like Chicago or New York or San Antonio or the jejune places. But recently, Father Patrick Mary has been visiting Eastern Europe. Where have you been?
Yeah, it was really an incredible trip, and as you say, I was gone for a bit, so right about 2 weeks, just under 2 weeks. I had the opportunity to travel actually in Poland, where I was working along the Polish-Ukrainian border for several days, and really I was all over the country on a median humanitarian mission is probably the most accurate way to describe it. To see, to cover, to share how the church is at work during in the middle of this Russian and Ukrainian war, which we've been seeing and hearing so much about. So it's really it's really a terrible crisis, and one that moved my heart. I'm not Polish. My family's not Polish, but happily, just after I was ordained a priest, as Father Bonaventure, many of our listeners will recall, because I talk about it literally all the time. My first assignment was to Poland, and I got to live there for 10 weeks and work on the World Youth Day project with the Knights of Columbus. It was really, really just an incredible experience, and because of that, I got to know a lot of the Polish Knights of Columbus. In Poland, many of these guys who are these Polish members of the Knights of Columbus have been involved in the war effort, particularly with humanitarian relief in the war effort. So I was hearing their stories, and I wanted to go and to support them, to show solidarity with what they were suffering and their efforts, and more importantly, to tell the world what I was seeing.
Yeah, and that's we like to hear, because we hear news stories and things. But we thought it'd be great to talk to a correspondent who's actually there, sort of on place, but to get a feeling for in this episode, hear some stories about what was going on there. How was God maybe involved or not involved in the church, what people were experiencing, and then we'll talk about maybe things that you brought back with you in a way. I'm not like show and tell stuff unless you have some of that, but like spiritual things or insights, changes, ways you've been praying differently perhaps for the last day or two, or things for this Lent, and as we enter into, of course, this is Holy Week. So when this episode is released, so we'll start with just the very briefest of details about. Who did you go with, and what was the kind of the framing of it, the details of the travel?
Yeah, so I started to get into that a little bit, right? I went principally with the Knights of Columbus, who as I said, are established in Poland, right? So and I think right there, that's really important to understand. This was not the Knights of Columbus coming as an external organization, right? This wasn't the entree of a foreign organization. This was an organization that's established in Poland. The Knights have many councils. They have many members. The guys are really active. They have a very great devotion to Blessed Michael McGivney, the American founder, the saintly American founder of the Knights of Columbus. So that was really remarkable to see all these Polish guys, devoted to our saint,
Hmm.
this Irish American who served the people of New Haven in New England there. So it was really striking, and I'd seen that in my previous trip, but I loved seeing that again. But but I was traveling with another Dominican friar, with our brother, Father Jonathan Kalish, who's the director of chaplains for the Knights of Columbus. And as I said, we had worked together on the World Youth Day project, so I knew a lot of Polish Knights, but also a lot of Dominicans. And that's really where our story starts,
Mm.
because when Father Kalish and I were flying into Warsaw, we were planning to stay with our Dominican brothers in Freda, which is the Dominican provincialate in Warsaw, the provincial headquarters, the headquarters of the order in Poland. But there weren't rooms available because they had given all the rooms away to women and their children, to Ukrainian refugees. So right so right away we were impacted by the war. We were able to get rooms with the Redemptorists. So, and lest you think too ill of the Redemptorists, you say, "Oh, those freaking Redemptorists, they're not hosting anybody." No, don't think that. That's not true,
Hmm.
because right away when we walked in, we met Ukrainian refugees that the Redemptorists were staying, and that became a pattern throughout our whole visit. Every place we went, every religious house I stayed in, every family that hosted us was also hosting refugees. So
Okay.
we were staying side by side with so many of the women and children that have been driven from their homeland because of the war. And that is overpowering. I was not ready for what it was going to feel like to just show up and immediately be be living with, alongside, suffering with, in a way, um, these women and their families.
Sure. Okay. Well, that gives us a good entree. You were there about 2 weeks now. So, yeah, tell us we talk about the human side of things that people might read about. But what was your experience of the people? What were they like? What was the background? Sounds like a cultural anthropology experiment. But I mean, just
Right.
what was the general? We could say the mood over those 2 weeks. Now, the situation keeps changing all the time. But what was the yeah? What did you see? What did you hear? What was going on?
Yeah, I'm certainly by no means an expert in Eastern European history, right? I've no substantial comments to make
Mhm.
about the Polish history and the relationships of Poles and Ukrainians. There are a lot of people that have a lot of interesting things to say about that, but I'm not one of them. So what I can say, though, is that immediately when we landed, Poland felt like a country at war, and I never
Hmm.
experienced that before. And I had thought, okay, we're going on this humanitarian mission, and I'm going to, showcase a lot of the work of the Knights of Columbus and other great Catholic organizations like Caritas Poland, which is the equivalent of Polish Catholic Charities, or the Knights of Malta. So I was thinking, like, kind of, I guess I would say I had the mentality of a kind of natural disaster. But right away when we landed, Poland just felt different. It felt
Hmm.
different to me, and there was very much a sense of just, I would say, quiet unrest. I mean, one thing that was remarkable, I speak very little Polish and no Ukrainian, but even I could tell the difference in the languages, and you could hear Ukrainian all over the place.
Hmm.
And you certainly saw right away women and children, and we saw them throughout all of our travels. We were all over the country, and we would be driving through these remote villages, and you would see Ukrainian women and their children, these refugees, sort of walking by the roadside. So it was the crisis is very present. In fact, a few days ago, I was texting a colleague at Alatea, who's Polish and works for our Polish edition, and this colleague was telling me, I just can't get over seeing these women and children at our playground. So this colleague of mine
Hmm.
has a young child and goes to the playground every day with the child, right? And he just said, I cannot get over seeing all of these women and children and never any fathers. And while they're at the playground, they call their fathers, they call their family members, and the children cry and just wonder when they're going to be able to see their family members. So it's very the
Hmm.
reality of the war is very present in everyday life in Poland, and
Yeah.
I was not prepared.
Right. Okay. And so you said you traveled around all over the country and things. Can you share a bit like what were you doing there? I mean, obviously, sacrament. I mean, it was a humanitarian thing, so of course you weren't,
Right.
but you were there as a Dominican priest. So, and with the Knights of Columbus. So, what kind of things were you involved with? Like, what was the daily? I mean, every day was probably different, I suspect, but what were the kind of things that you were doing when you were over there, and yeah, what were you up to?
Yeah, so the main hat that I was wearing was in media. So I was talking to a lot of the volunteers and a lot of the refugees to hear what they were experiencing. I mean, you would think that the language barrier would be significant, but it wasn't. So many young Ukrainians speak English with ease,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a lot of very very moving conversations with them. Um, and then alongside the Knights of Columbus, we were working to organize those relief efforts. So I participated in loading trucks and helping to coordinate those deliveries into Ukraine. So that there's the one of the major relief efforts of Poland, right, is trying to get humanitarian aid into Ukraine. Right now, it remains to be complicated because leasing companies don't want to send their trucks into a war zone. So
Mm-hmm.
you have to find Ukrainian trucks, but the trucks and Ukrainian drivers are limited, and it's just wildly problematic. So even people with the best intentions, and there are many of them, are having difficulties getting supplies into Ukraine itself. So I was helping to coordinate that. When we arrived, we were trying to envision how the Knights could improve the service that they were offering. So, just to give you perspective, these little border towns where thousands of people are crossing a day, at Ravenna, between 6 and 20,000 people were crossing at the height of it, just after the war began. It's a little town of 100 people.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing there,
Wow.
and suddenly you have
Swamped.
thousands of refugees. Yeah, literally walking across. Um, so when people cross on foot, they need a place to sit and warm up because it's cold.
Yeah.
It's starting to warm up a little bit, but in March, it was very cold still. So the Polish Knights of Columbus had erected pretty early on, just a few days after the war began. They erected a series of tents. So they were sort of like tailgate pop-ups, and they
Mm-hmm.
put up some walls and had some makeshift heaters, and really did a great job to get something going. And then that site was improved thanks to some connections we had from World Youth Day. So we worked with a contractor, a production and event planning company, a fantastic Catholic gentleman that we used for World Youth Day, helped us to erect a more quasi-permanent site. So to get a tent with a floor, with better walls, better lighting, that kind of thing. So there's a rather large, kind of quasi-permanent structure there at Ravenna now, and then we expanded the night service to other border locations, including Budimir, um, and then we visited a number of other sites to see what kind of aid those other locations needed, or to see what the best practices at those sites were that we could imitate at ours. So
Sure. Okay. And that sounds like the structural part of it, but you also mentioned all the conversations you had with people, reporting and checking in and getting the feel for things. Maybe some stories. Who did you meet? People that
yeah.
stuck out, and maybe from both the refugee side and maybe from even from the Polish side. What
Mhm.
kind of what any stories that stick out that were affected you?
So two of my favorites. One is a brother of ours in Poland at Krakow. So Krakow is the study center for all the Dominican seminarians in Poland. And one of the deacons who's preparing to be ordained a priest and is in the middle of his comprehensive exams was overseeing the welcoming of refugees to their house of studies, to Holy Trinity Priory, which is just really amazing, to the priory in Krakow. They were hosting, when I stayed with them, um, about 54 people over the course of the few days that I was at Krakow. All told, by the time that I was there, they had hosted 108. I'm sure that number it's
Hmm.
probably doubled by now. 108 people, and all of this was being managed by Deacon while he was studying for his comprehensive exam. So he'd get phone
Sure.
calls in the middle of the night. Do you have a bed? And he'd get up and try and arrange it and welcome people.
Wow.
And the sense of urgency and crisis is very real. It's not being exaggerated at all, and it's very much based on personal connections. So, a friend of a friend hears there's a room in the Dominicans, and a name gets passed, and the number gets shared, and that's how someone lands there. Meeting Andre was really a great treat, and he's really a lovely hero. But another conversation that was more difficult for me was talking to a young Syrian woman who had fled several wars already, um,
Hmm.
who had fled Kharkiv, and as we were chatting, I reached a kind of difficult moment in the conversation where I realized, as best I could realize what she was going through, because she had no home, uh,
Hmm.
and she was just kind of freely envisioning where she would go to build a life in the future. And I think the existential weight of that is something that is not captured by the news. And I myself hadn't really thought of it until I was speaking with her and realizing, yeah, I mean, I don't know what I would do, or where, or where I would go. Where after home is gone, what's your next plan?
Yeah. Wow. I mean, it's, I think that you said the war zone aspect. I mean, America has been blessed with, um, not having real war on our soil for a long time, shall we say. We kind of did it to ourselves, basically, back in the old days. Um, but to be in a place where, yeah, there's war, that people are being displaced, that you don't get to choose where you get to move, but you have to move if you don't want to die, this sort of thing. Or I find this is it's just a striking existential disconnect, you could say, to us. And I imagine it's a bit of a vertigo experience when you first get over there, and it kind of changes. I suspect it changes how you've kind of viewed daily events, you could say, or what the importance of a day and the importance of what was going on at any given point, because we can get just lost in minutia, you could say, not entirely minutia, but these situations have a way of waking you up, I suppose, too. So I suspect um, your priorities changed a little bit over there, based upon just even participating with the people. I suspect it had an effect on your kind of outlook and views on daily situations. Um, let's talk a little about the the Catholic aspect of things over there. Sacraments, prayer. What was your so you were a reporter, of course, and you're listening to stories, but you're also Dominican, helping out there. What was the presence of the church, the presence of the sacraments, the presence of the priests, the presence of the people praying? Those are the Catholic. What was the religious aspect of this, and how were the people religiously, and how was that helpful, or was that what was going on there?
Yeah, it was very deeply moving. I mean, as always, God shows up where you don't expect God to show up. You can plan for God to be in certain places, and God is going to do whatever He wants at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the places that I found myself having the most frequent conversations, which I really wasn't thinking about, was with the humanitarian volunteers. People that had come from all over the world that were themselves not necessarily religious, but were
Mm-hmm.
looking for something to do, and were surprised to find the Catholic Church, at the end of the earth, in this nowhere village in Eastern Europe. Surprised to find such a strong presence of the church. So those were some of the best conversations. Speaking with them, with Brits or Americans that were themselves disaffiliated or lapsed Catholics in some cases, and
Mm-hmm.
there were some very beautiful moments of people who hadn't been to confession in years returning to confession
Mm-hmm.
because they found priests in this place. And that for me was a powerful experience of the kind of witness that the church offers when we as the body of Christ really live Matthew 25. It touches people's hearts. And again, these volunteers were there because they were trying to do some good, and they couldn't believe that they would find American priests there that wanted to do the same good that they wanted to do. It
Yeah.
was it was very moving.
Were there many? So were there the people that are volunteering and coming over? Obviously, a lot of them were Polish, but did you meet you? So you met a bunch of Americans, Brits, people from all over.
People from all over the world. Another really difficult conversation I had was with, and only difficult because of the weight of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
All the volunteers are very pleasant. There's very much a prevailing spirit of engagement, right? People are there because they want to help, and it's the volunteers are creating among themselves a positive atmosphere despite the very heavy nature of the war. But another great conversation I had was with a firefighter from France. He's from Marseille, and he's been a firefighter for 30 years. And we were chatting casually in French, and he just kept he repeated the word war several times because he couldn't believe that he was himself saying it.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I've been a firefighter for decades, and I've helped people after all kinds of natural disasters, after tornadoes and floods and hurricanes and wildfires, and I've been there to do humanitarian work all over Europe, but never have I been called anywhere because of a war. Because of a
Mm-hmm.
war, I can't believe there's a war. And so that's one conversation that has really stayed with me. Just the disbelief, and many people are saying this: how could there be a war in Europe in 2022? And I think the war raises a lot of difficult questions for us about
Mm.
human nature, about the illusion of progress. There's some of the same questions that the pandemic has raised. The illusion of our own safety has been dispelled, and these are
Yeah.
difficult to face.
Yes, I think that I suspect that many people have the same experience that I had in this situation where I kept thinking it was similar to the pandemic that I kept thinking I'm gonna wake up one day and this is gonna be like, oh, just kidding, we don't have this not global pandemic, no big deal, back to normal. And I felt the same way at the start of the of this experience. I thought, just wake up and say, oh, Putin's just gonna say, oh, just kidding, no, those weren't really bombing people. This wasn't really a land war, no helicopters, that kind of thing. But it's not. It's no, it's entirely real, and I think you're right that it raises questions, reflection questions, which we want to shift to about the kind of bigger issues of okay, what does this have to say about the human condition? What does it have to say about our relationship to the world? What does it have to say about Christ? What does it have to say about the church? And just on the human condition aspect of it, it is a reminder that things are getting better. Things are getting better. Progress, indoor plumbing, talking to your grandma over Skype, whatever. That things they're getting better, but the humanity is still we're still humans. We're still sinful, fallen humans, who get greedy and envious and prideful and weak and all these things, right? I mean, this is we're finishing through Holy Week here, and it's the cross is still valuable, shall we say? That it's still necessary, that his saving work and his healing is important as much as the elevating that grace provides. And this war, this event, this happening, reminds one that things, bizarrely enough, can go forward and backward at the same time. That aspects of our lives can go forward, and I guess that's true in the microcosm too, in the individual. That there are things about us that are getting better, but at the same time, hand in hand, things about us that might be slipping too. And this happens on the global level. So what are you can add to that if you'd like in reflections, but also what have you, as you've been meditating, taking away? It's hard not to imagine that you've spent some time thinking about these things and they've been percolating, or whatever metaphor you'd like to use here. What are some takeaways, or what are some reflections on, say, bigger issues uh, that you brought away from this, both existentially, you could say, spiritually, philosophically, Godsplainingly?
Yeah, I think that I mean the first one I kind of already gave away. I hinted at that already, which is just to say that God will be in places where you do not expect to find him, and that's part of the delight of how God works. And so, I was offered the invitation to go on this trip. It was not planned. It was very spontaneous. I believe a lot of this was really brought to be, by the Holy Spirit, to help raise awareness and offer some actual aid in the midst of a very difficult situation. So I think that I think that um, I know that I'm very grateful for the grace to have been able to say yes to that invitation and just to participate in it. And it doesn't suffice ever in Christian life to say, okay, I did one thing for you, Lord, and that's plenty, right? but we have to return over and over and over again to continue to allow ourselves to follow the Lord where we think He's leading, even when those plans are out of left field, as this very much felt for me. But I'm very grateful for that. So finding God where we might not expect to find Him. I was deeply moved by the religiosity of the Ukrainian people. I think
Mm-hmm.
the American response is sort of looking at this situation and saying, well, where is God in this? When I talked to Ukrainians, there were two things that they would consistently say. They would say, close the skies. that was the first one. They
Mm-hmm.
would make a kind of political appeal. And then the second thing they would say is pray for Ukraine. And And I don't think that was prompted because I looked like a religious person, because I certainly don't look like their priests. So I don't believe I don't believe that that was a natural connection. I think that that's really just what they believed. So their sentiment was not that they had been abandoned by God, as maybe we might expect them to feel,
Mm-hmm.
but that this was actually a moment of confession and reliance on God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's this is the I mean, this is the mystery of the cross, I suppose. There's no justification for the evil that's done. Evil has no reason ultimately of itself, moral evil at least. Physical evil, earthquakes and stuff. That's just if you're going to create a world with tectonic plates, you're going to get earthquakes sometimes. But moral evil, you could create a world with no moral evil. It's perfectly imaginable, even if not in all the details, and yet it does exist. So there are mysteries here, and yet at the same time, to kind of attach that mystery is the mystery of the cross, the fact that God comes as a man and dies, and we hold that up. Difference, of course, between Catholic and Protestant churches often is our cross has a body on it, has Christ's body on it, and that we find this significant that we don't that yes, he's resurrected, um, but his passion is the important part, and I think part of that's the Catholic realization, not just the Irish realization, that this life is a veil of tears. That it can that we are you can be very blessed, and many of us are. I certainly am one. I have no particular sufferings, I should say, at this point, but many of us do go through. Many are not, or many are spared, are not spared of that, especially. I mean, Ukraine, and C.S. Lewis says at some point that suffering is God's. He says in the problem of pain, suffering is God's megaphone, and you don't like that. No one likes that image, I guess. But I can't admit, but that it's true. That the time that
Right.
I have been most prayerful is when the time when I have undergone in my family particular sufferings, and I've never prayed so hard. Regardless of it seems to regardless of whether he's answered or not, it seems. But I have been driven to God, in bizarrely enough, in the most difficult times, and the most unintelligible times, as opposed to it's the times where things are going well that you can kind of get away, except you have the religious life brings us much structure and having images around and such. It's why we're here, I think, is because without the religious life I wouldn't think about God that much. But it just seem to be true that in suffering, one, I guess, because the options are so limited, you either turn to God in love and hoping in love and in the victory at the end, or you just realize it's all for naught, and nothing matters. And those are stark suffering, especially at this level. I think leads to stark realization that either nothing matters or God loves you, and you've got to decide which one of those you think is the most accurate description, end of the day, about what this life is about. And we can skip that for most of our time in America or in certain lives, but suffering raises the question of whether you do believe that nothing matters or that love alone matters. That's it. You have those two choices. Really, those two choices.
Nice. That was a good little slip in of your motto there. Love alone is credible.
Yeah. Well, Hans and Balthasar. You just got to go back to that. At the end of the day, truth really matters. That's really important, and being smart and stuff, and Dominicans. But at the end of the day, it's love. That's it. That's it. It's either love or nothing. Yeah. Caritas, uh, or nihil. So, yeah. But you probably saw. I mean, you certainly saw that. Now, before we go, uh, what are you taking away from this? Do you think it will? I mean, has it affected your preaching or your prayer or something? Has it been a part of your heart, you could say, Leon Bloy-esque, I suppose, that has been opened by just seeing these people and this experience? And obviously there'll be more to come from that. But at this point, any kind of takeaway from for your own life in this?
Right. Well, one thing that I will certainly share is that in the United States, service tends to be pretty ideologically driven, by particular causes that are taken up as the banners by different communities within the church. And the kinds of service and the ways you love correspond to which community you find yourself living in, whether it be something that you do for immigrants or something for the pro-life cause. Right. Just a few
Mm-hmm.
examples. One thing that was so extraordinary about the war effort is that it was completely free of ideologies because the need was so very great. And part of that freedom, of course, was the chaotic situation of the war. Part of it was the nature of Poland, which has divisions, of course, that are different than the United States and not necessarily as noticeable to someone like me. But part of it is part of it I took as a serious as a moment to reflect on what the nature of that kind of, what we might call humanitarian work, but really loving service means, because that is a real power, and the witness of the gospel was on full display in that, and that's something that I know I need to continue to pray and reflect on, and assess how I live as an authentic witness of Christ.
Yeah, well, war is a great leveler of people, but also ideological kind of things that fade away, and the important things that really matter. I think it's true for any crises, and families know that in crisis situations, the little things seem to go away, and focus on the essentials. Thanks again to all of our supporters. We want to say as we close this episode out, if you'd like to support our work here at Godsplaining, check us out at patreon.com/Godsplaining. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or any place that Elon Musk has purchased a commanding share in. Like, subscribe, leave a 5-star review, or 6 or 7, or whatever those things are. But don't lie about it if you want to leave a 4. But I mean, whatever. Visit godsplaining.org to shop our merchandise, pick up the cool stuff, check out the cool new logos and the colors and all that. Just a feast for the eyes for those of us who can see color. And get dates and information for upcoming Godsplaining events. So, in particular, there's some openings still, and there are retreats in July. If you want to check that out on godsplaining.org. But thanks again for all of you who are listening. Thanks again for it's good to have Father Patrick back. I'm sure you're happy. You noticed I was filling in on some Lexios, but now Father Patrick's back, so you get his joy again. And thanks for sharing with us. But thanks for listening to us. Please be praying for us, and we'll be praying for you. God bless.